Hello and welcome to World Konnect. We are back again with a roundup of all that made news across the world. While chemical attack in Syria and pictures of dying children shook the world, one fears the worst may follow as President Trump orders a direct attack on Syria. Russia warns of serious consequences. Meanwhile, terror strikes in Sweden and Russia. On the other side, civilian protests rage against the state in Serbia and Venezuela. Amidst these stories of violence, anger and even hopelessness, city of Athens transforms into an art gallery, and one musician is trying to keep the Dead Sea alive. This is World Konnect, your window to the world. Let's begin with the focus of the show. In first direct action in Syria, US launches missile strikes as a response to the gruesome chemical attack. Trump calls civilized world to join in. Russia warns of serious consequences. Horrors of Syrian war continue to trigger grief and pain as chemical attack kills dozens, including many children. Syria denies conducting any such attack, puts the blame on rebels for having chemical weapons. Terror sees no boundaries, causes loss of lives from Russia to Sweden. Suicide bombing at St. Petersburg metro claims 14 lives. In Sweden, truck rams into people, killing 4. Government sees terror angle into the incident. Protests escalate in Venezuela as opposition demands removal of Supreme Court judges who annulled the Congress. Defiant President Maduro accused of dictatorship. Assad crossed many lines. Perhaps these lines by visibly moved President Trump after the gruesome chemical attack in Syria was a sign of the imminent change in America's policy on Syria. United States launched a military strike on Syrian government targets, becoming for the first time a direct participant in the Syrian crisis. The international community is concerned if the already war-torn Syria could become a place for an America and Russian face-off.
No one would have thought that US policy on Syria would change so quickly and would be acted upon so swiftly. President Donald Trump's warning to Syria over chemical attack was seen by many as rhetoric to convey a stern message, but least expected that Trump's change of view about Assad meant a direct response by the US. It is the first military action in Syria in the past 6 years of the ongoing war and violence. The Pentagon claimed it fired 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles from destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean on Thursday night. Washington said that the strikes aimed at the aircraft, hardened aircraft shelters, petroleum and logistical storage areas, ammunition supply bunkers, air defense systems and radars. The strikes mark the first time US becoming a direct combatant in the Syria crisis. President Trump said at his Mar-a-Lago resort that he ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons.
He also called on all civilized nations to join United States in seeking to end the slaughter and bloodshed in Syria and to end terrorism of all kinds and of all types. The US action comes just a day after Trump said that the chemical attack crossed a lot of lines for him. He went on to say that his attitude towards Syria and Assad has changed very much. Trump's administration's stance on regime change in Syria had been in sharp contrast to his predecessor Barack Obama's, who asserted that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's removal is a must for resolution of the Syria crisis. Trump never put that as a precondition, but chemical attack in Idlib became as a watershed that forced a drastic change in the current administration's policy. The US had even warned that if United Nations fails following the gas attack, it would act on its own. In her emotional speech at the United Nations, Washington's envoy called on countries to wake up and act.
We saw rows of lifeless bodies, some still in diapers, some with visible scars of a chemical weapons attack. Look at those pictures. We cannot close our eyes to those pictures. We cannot close our minds of the responsibility to act.
Syria outrightly denied the allegations of launching the chemical attack and maintained that it was a chemical arsenal depot of the rebels that caused the deaths after it was targeted in airstrikes. Russia also slammed Western powers to label blames based on unreliable information. As US strikes escalate Washington's role in Syria, what now remains to be seen is what turn the crisis will take from now on. Will it really work as a deterrent for the warring sides to de-escalate tension, or will it lead to a further spate of clashes?
Russia, a close ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, strongly condemned what it called the illegitimate actions by the US and further said that the consequences of this move could be extremely serious. Russia accused the US of trying to overthrow the legitimate government in the sovereign Syria. The United States was disappointed by Russia's stance and warned it was prepared to do more. Syria's envoy, Monzer, meanwhile called the strikes a treacherous act of aggression and a grave violation of international law and the UN Charter. United Nations, while urging for a restraint to avoid any escalation of the situation in Syria, said that any action must abide by international law. The 15-nation Security Council met for an emergency meeting following US strikes on Syria. Syria has been at the center of one of the worst humanitarian crises of this decade. Earlier this week, hell broke loose on the civilians once again as the suspected chemical attack on the rebel-held town of Khan Sheikhoun in northwestern Syria took place. More than 80 people were choked to death, including many children, while they were still asleep. Hundreds suffered symptoms consistent with reaction to nerve gas. While the America and Russia pointed fingers at one another, the world was shocked to see the ghastly photos of little children gasping for breath. Grief and pain is what Abdul Hamid's world means to him now. Choking back tears, the inconsolable father bid a final goodbye to all his dreams he had seen for his 9-month-old twins, Aya and Ahmad, as he buried their bodies. The toddlers were among more than 20 family members Hamid had reportedly lost in Tuesday's alleged chemical attack in Syria's Khan Sheikhoun area, south of the city of Idlib. He is the only one alive from his family now. Hamid is not alone. There are many more similar stories, tales of horror that no one wants to hear. Heart-wrenching images of people and children suffocating, choking to death and being given treatment to recover left the whole world cold. Chills ran down the spine after seeing unconscious young kids losing breath. Another instance of how the war has been taking a toll on innocents and especially children. Reports suggested that nearly 80 people, including dozens of children, were killed in the said attack, while hundreds others were injured. Victims were said to have been killed with a nerve agent, probably sarin. Activists and witnesses were quoted saying warplanes attacked the area when most of the victims were asleep. Western countries have blamed Assad regime for the attack, while Syrian government has denied carrying out any chemical strike. This was not the first time when a chemical attack was carried out in the war-torn nation. In 2013, a similar attack in the Damascus suburb of Ghouta reportedly claimed nearly 1,500 lives. Like this time, the attack was on Syrian government. Both the attack triggered worldwide outrage and anger, with calls of immediate resolution of Syrian crisis and bringing culprits to justice. Voices have got louder for extending helping hand to those trapped amid the unending violence and crisis. But will these voices reach the ears of the warring sides? Only time will tell. Sweden police have arrested a man for a terrorist crime hours after a truck ploughed into a crowd outside a busy department store in central Stockholm, killing 4 people and injuring about 15 others. The man was arrested on suspicion of a terrorist crime through murder. Earlier media reports suggested that the suspected attacker was a 39-year-old from Uzbekistan with likely connection to an extremist group. If confirmed as a terror attack, it would be Sweden's first such deadly assault. Prime Minister Stefan Löfven said that he had strengthened the country's border controls. He said the country will not be frightened and asserted that terrorists can never defeat Sweden. Countries around the world, including Germany, England, United States, have condemned the attack in the heart of Swedish capital. Terrorism knows no boundaries, and this time the target was St. Petersburg metro in Russia. The suspected bomber, a 22-year-old Russian young man with interest in music and defense arts, who appears to have been radicalized by extremist ideology. While the suicide bombing rocked the metro, taking 14 lives, thanks to the presence of mind of the train driver, casualties were limited and evacuation made efficient. President Putin was in the city when the attack took place. While world leaders across the world condemned the attack, what stood out was the display of unity and resilience of the Russians in the face of crisis.
Terror struck Russian soil as a suicide bombing on the St. Petersburg metro killed 14 people on Monday. Several others were injured in the blast that had completely destroyed one carriage of the metro. The blast occurred as the metro was travelling between the Prasar and Technologichesky Institute stations. The attack took place on the day Russian President Vladimir Putin was visiting St. Petersburg, his home city. The metro driver acted with promptness, not stopping the metro in between soon after the blast was heard, but stopped only at the next station. Quick action that allowed the injured to be treated without further delay.
At that moment, I had no time to think about fear. I had to do my job. Thanks to his vigilance, the attack was also prevented. There was another explosive device which could have caused serious damage. He fenced it off in time, he called experts in time, and as a result, another act of terror was prevented.
Investigators revealed the name of the suspected bomber as 22-year-old Akbarzon Jalilov. Jalilov is a Russian citizen who was born in Osh of Kyrgyzstan. Jalilov is believed to have had radical Islamist links. He had also reportedly taken an apartment in St. Petersburg just a month before the attack. Items found during a search in his place included an unexploded bomb similar to the one found in another metro station on the day of the attack. The bomb was defused after evacuation of the residence. 8 other people were also detained in connection with the attack. The country has been on alert as the Islamic State has repeatedly threatened revenge attacks for the military intervention in Syria. Moscow's forces support the Syrian government troops, loyal to President Bashar al-Assad. Russian President Vladimir Putin also raised security concerns at a meeting with security officials. The incident has shocked Russians as they struggle to cope with the attack on their soil. Thousands rallied in various parts of the country, including the capital, Moscow, to pay tribute to the victims. Though grief overshadowed the country, the citizens showed a spirit of resilience.
We are here to honor the memory of those killed in Petersburg, to support them and everyone that is grieving. We need this event to show we are not scared, that terrorism should be brought to an end.
World leaders condemned the horrific act, offering support to Russia.
Our thoughts must be with the victims and their friends and families. But this shows the terrible terrorist threat that we are all facing. I'm very clear, as the people of the UK were after the attack in London, that we will prevail. The terrorists will not win. Our values will prevail.
The United States condemns this reprehensible attack and act of violence. Our thoughts and prayers are with the injured and with the Russian people as we extend our deepest condolences to the loved ones who have been killed and injured.
There is more than just increased security to prevent these attacks, even as the world struggles to grapple the root of the problem causing disturbances in various regions. World leaders vow not to be cowed by these attacks.
Serbian Prime Minister Alexander Vucic's presidential election victory did not go down well with youth of the nation. Although Vucic would be occupying what is largely seen as a ceremonial position, the young protesters are anxious that his autocratic regime is likely to continue.
Serbia witnessed numerous protests this week as the majorly young population took to the streets following Prime Minister Alexander Vucic's presidential election victory. Protesters refer to the new rule of Vucic as the one-man autocracy. Though as the president, Vucic will have ceremonial role. It is believed that he will retain power through control of his ruling Serbian Progressive Party. It is also widely expected that he would appoint a loyal ally as Prime Minister and will thereby keep a tight hold on policy and other decisions. The young citizens undertaking the protests firmly claim that they do not have any political affiliations. They have raised concerns over the situation in the country, ranging from health to police. The young protesters claim that the education policies of the present government are on the back seat. They also said that Vucic has also not taken steps to increase salaries and pensions.
President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have established a US-China comprehensive dialogue and agreed to expand areas of cooperation while managing differences based on mutual respect. The White House said that the two leaders agreed to elevate existing bilateral talks to reflect the importance of making progress on issues. Trump and Xi also established a new and cabinet-level framework for negotiations at the U.S. President's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. During the meeting, Trump highlighted the challenges caused by the Chinese government's intervention in its economy and raised serious concerns about the impact of China's industrial, agricultural, technology and cyber policies on American jobs and exports. The two sides noted the urgency of the threat of North Korea's weapons program, reaffirmed their commitment to a denuclearized Korean peninsula, and committed to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions. The two sides also had a candid discussion on regional and maritime security. Amid severe political and economic crisis, Venezuelans took to the streets to protest a move by the country's Supreme Court to strip away powers of the Congress. The protesters, led by the opposition leaders, demand the removal of Apex Court judges who signed the controversial order.
There's hardly any day in Venezuela without demonstrations and clashes since the Supreme Court nullified the Congress last week. While the widely condemned decision was quickly overturned, the opposition has stepped up street protests against President Nicolas Maduro. Massive marches and rallies are now a common sight in the capital Caracas and elsewhere. Clashes were reported on Thursday between opposition supporters and security forces as protesters were blocked from heading further. Opposition leader Enrique Capriles vowed to continue with the anti-government movement.
Venezuelans cannot be indifferent. We elected a National Assembly with more than 14 million Venezuelans, and we do not have to accept Maduro disregarding the National Assembly.
Amid growing tensions and demands to remove judges who signed the Supreme Court order, lawmakers passed a motion on Wednesday denouncing the rupture of Venezuela's constitution and another asking for the sacking of judges. But that would be merely symbolic, since the Congress requires the support of other institutions, which are behind Maduro, to dismiss the judges. President Maduro remained as defiant as ever.
Venezuela is in peace today. The whole country producing and working with small pockets of violence which were neutralized with the power of the Constitution, and we do not achieve their objectives, which were to fill Caracas with violence. Caracas is absolutely peaceful and tranquil.
Venezuela is suffering from triple-digit inflation, shortages of basic foods and medicines, and one of the world's highest murder rates. Countering this, the Maduro government says a US-backed business elite is responsible for Venezuela's economic downturn and is now trying to foment a coup to impose right-wing rule. His supporters have also been holding rallies in the capital city Caracas to consolidate support.
And let's now have a look at some other stories that are making headlines across the world.
Washington, D.C. In a rare move, Senate Republicans on Thursday crushed a Democratic blockade of President Donald Trump's U.S. Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell went nuclear to crush the Democratic filibuster to prevent Gorsuch's nomination. The option is termed nuclear because its use is very rare and seen as an extreme break from Senate usual practices. The option allowed the Republicans-led House to change rules to avoid a 3/4 supermajority to end filibuster won by Democrats. With filibuster, Democrats had planned to obstruct Gorsuch's appointment through an indefinite discussion. With all decks cleared for Neil Gorsuch's assuming of the vacant Supreme Court post for a lifetime, the top court will now have a 5-4 equation in favor of conservatives. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says he and US President Donald Trump have agreed on a telephone call that North Korea's latest ballistic missile launch was a dangerous provocation and a serious threat. North Korea conducted a ballistic missile test off its east coast on Wednesday, the latest it has test-fired in recent months. The test sparked angry reactions from Japan and South Korea. The Japanese government extended unilateral trade and maritime sanctions against Pyongyang by 2 years. Meanwhile, China has urged all sides to exercise restraint. Thailand Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha says the country is now on course to an election within the 19 months set by the constitution. However, the exact date of polls is yet to be decided. Thailand's king signed a military-backed constitution into law on Thursday. Thais approved the long-awaited constitution at a referendum last August. The military government has promised to restore democracy after a 2014 coup. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan continued his poisonous rhetoric against European nations as his country prepares to vote in a referendum on April 16 to widen presidential powers. Erdogan says he will keep on calling European countries Nazi remnants if they maintain their attitude against Turkey. He has been fiercely attacking European countries like Germany for banning his ministers from speaking to rallies of Turkish voters abroad. Voting is already on for Turk nationals living abroad. Floods in Peru have claimed more than 100 lives with 500,000 citizens affected. As floodwaters start to subside in parts of the country, health officials are concerned about the spread of diseases such as malaria, dengue and Zika. About half of Peru has been declared an emergency zone from the deadly floods, which authorities predict will cost the country more than $6 billion in reconstruction funds. Meanwhile, 2 Hercules planes filled with aid arrived in Peru from the United States on Thursday to beef up relief efforts. The death toll has crossed 300 in southwest Colombia, which was hit by devastating mudslides last Friday. The most severely afflicted city is Mocoa, where many colonies were destroyed beyond recognition after a flow of mud and rocks flushed in from a river. With no drinking water or electricity, survivors are now struggling for survival. Homeless residents have been relocated to temporary shelters.
And for the first time, Germany and Greece together are hosting Documenta, the acclaimed European modern art exhibition. And unlike usual exhibitions that are housed in a building, Documenta has transformed the historic city of Athens into an art gallery. Reflecting on the issues of the modern world, the exhibition takes place in the backdrop of unlikely places such as cinemas, libraries and even ancient monuments. See it for yourself.
Greece, home to a number of ancient artifacts, now boasts of modern art installations too, Documenta. The 14th edition of Europe's most modern art exhibitions for the first time is being held in 2 places, Castle of Germany, its traditional home ground, and in the Greek capital, Athens. The works are scattered across 40 different venues in the Greek capital. More than 160 artists showcase their creations this year in landmark locations including archaeological sites, squares, cinemas and libraries.
For me, it's very interesting to work with this concept of dual location. So for me, this is just the start of a 6-month-long process where this nomadic space for events will travel from Athens to Kassel. So working with that sort of strip of line, representing 2 very contrasting places in Europe is very interesting.
The exhibits reflect on various themes challenging the modern world, including migration and economic crisis, issues the Greeks are battling with right now. The payment of Greek debt to Germany with olives and art exhibits at the Athens National Museum of Contemporary Art features thousands of green and black olive. There is also another creation where an open kitchen encourages visitors to sit down and grab a bite to eat. The works reflect the artistic thinking of modern times, where art is not just defined by boundaries but aims to look at deeper thoughts along with the freedom of unique interpretations.
And this brings us to the end of this edition of World Konnect. Do send us your feedback. You can write to us. Our email ID is worldkonnect.ddnews@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. But before we conclude, we leave you with glimpses of the Qinthong Boat Festival in China. More than 400 decorative boats took part in over 8-century-old traditional race. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.